So with that, let's go a little bit deeper into looking at how the policy looks like and what are the different criterias we offer today. To begin with, from a URL filtering rule standpoint, it's a completely rule-based engine. You could change the rules. You could define and decide which admin gets what rules to be operated on in terms of RBAC. You can rank among the admins in terms of who creates the rule and what is the rank within that admin to manage those rules, rule names, rule status. You can turn off or enable, disable depending on when you want to make a particular rule applicable, and you can put a lot of descriptions to describe each of these rules. Those are very standard stuff for any rule. But the key point is what are the granular criterias we offer within this rule is very important. As you could see, I talked about those 6 global categories, about 30 super categories, and 110 plus subcategories. All of that is something you can configure manually, select, and choose, along with users, groups, departments criteria. And not only that, you can combine with location, and you could have a group of locations. If you want to have a single security posture or policy applicable for all of your employees across the globe, you could just create location groups and have that as part of the policy for all the locations. Even if a new locations get created, it automatically gets applied to the new location. And most importantly, we support all types of request methods of HTTP, like connect, get, add, put, delete, everything. And you can choose the time, protocol. We also support multiple dynamic protocols, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP or HTTP, DNS or HTTPS. You could combine that along with what protocol it is coming from and which user agent, what details are as part of the user agent. And the most compelling capability is devices. Oftentimes, you want to have different types of access control policies depending on whether you're coming from a BIOD versus a corporate and managed endpoint. This device and grouping of devices also allows you to have such handling of risk associated with the device when it comes to access policies. So those are the some top capabilities from a granularity perspective you could leverage. And the actions. This is the most important aspect. As you could see, allow and block are the most common type of actions you could define when you want your users to access particular categories of URLs. Along with that, we have caution, which I talked about, which enables a lot in giving an alert or notification, or in some cases coaching, to make sure they're vigilant when they are going to specific website, because it could have some potential harmful content made available on that website. And the isolation is one of the most popular capabilities in the past couple of years we are seeing on our platform, where customers do want to make sure they provide a better user experience and performance for their end users, but at the same time, they want to make sure their enterprise is secure from any ransomwares, phishing attacks, and so on and so forth. So isolation significantly helps in achieving that trade-off of giving better user experience and access, while at the same time prevent the user from having any threats or compromise happening on their endpoints. So that's the capability around isolate. There are other capabilities in terms of how much daily bandwidth and daily time quota. This is all, again, capabilities to enhance the productivity of end user. We also have capabilities to redirect the content using ICAP for on-prem one-to and their softwares if customers are deploying. So overall, you could see more granularity around caution and isolation. As you select, you have multiple capabilities to achieve all the top commonly deployed use cases. Speaking of isolation, as I talked about earlier, this is one of the most significant enhancements to the platform, where we could bring the browser isolation capability into the platform. So this integration of Zscaler platform with browser isolation is something which enables customers to have a streamlined policies in terms of allowing a particular destination, but at the same time minimizing the security threats or compromise happening on the end device. It's very popular and big feature we have added, and many customers are using this. The way this feature works is you need to create an isolation profile in terms of defining all the attributes on how you want to isolate this particular traffic. And once you do that, you pick the action and choose the isolation profile. And you could see that granularity of details in terms of what policy action was taken on that user. Was he allowed? If yes, what was the location from which they're coming? And it is important to note that the location will be showing up as cloud browser as a location. That way, you know that this session has been fired through a cloud browser isolation session. A very popular, most differentiated use case, I would say, compared to other vendors. And this is a lot of value for customers in leveraging this particular function. Just to give you an overall picture of how a typical URL filtering policy looks like, it is part of our policy URL and cloud application control webpage. You could add URL filtering rules. As you could see, the criteria in this case is device from which the user is coming from, the protocol on which the traffic is seen, the request methods, categories, and different actions. And one important aspect I wanted to also talk about is I did discuss few of the advanced settings earlier in this session, like enabling safe search, enabling overriding a block category, identifying and discovering embedded sites categorization, using AML based content classification. All these capabilities are something you have to configure under advanced policy settings page within the URL filtering URL cloud application control page. There is a tab advanced policy setting. That's exactly where you go and create all this advanced capabilities, including SEPA. Now, let's look at a little bit on the overview of dashboards and visibility so that in day-to-day operations standpoint, you get a complete picture of what are these application categories which customers are accessing from a web browsing perspective. What are the top URLs? What are the top users? And what are the how many of them are social networking applications? How much of them is media applications? How many threats we identified? What are the different adware and spyware sites we detected from an advanced threat perspective? All of the insight is available on the platform's dashboard to give you a overall picture about whether it is to identify and understand the productivity of users or network bandwidth, or looking at how much threats you're blocking and what are the types of contents typically people go to. It gives you a big picture for you to plan an efficient policies within the URL filtering. And just to continue on that dashboard, you can customize and configure more dashboards, or there are predefined widgets we offer within the dashboard, which gives you a picture of what is the distribution of the traffic in different time of the day from a top protocol perspective, web browsing trend perspective, URL category perspective, and overall how much of these transactions fall into different sort of bandwidth consumptions and so on. You could analyze for planning your network accordingly for better productivity and collaboration. Another snapshot about how a typical Web Insights looks like. We have close to 90 plus fields we record for each and every web transaction. Anytime a user goes to a destination in the internet, we do record more than 90 plus fields with all the information which you need for identifying, understanding, or troubleshooting standpoint. And end user notification, which is very important capability as part of the platform, which serves users in multiple ways, whether it is to alert and caution a user whether they still want to visit this website. Oftentimes, this notification alone will significantly save customers or enterprises from minimizing the chances of going to malicious or bad domains. And also, if there is any website or any destination is blocked for them, it is important to notify the end user about why it got reported and who they should contact and what are the things they have to do to unblock that particular access is something very critical as part of the end user notification. And all of that, what I talked, is something completely configurable, customizable by enterprises to accommodate their reason, company name, company logo, the notification message they want to display, and so on. There are some predefined templates, and you can also customize and create your own custom templates in this case. Let me summarize some of the key URL filtering best practices I talked in this session. Always start with a current corporate acceptable internet usage policy. Most of enterprises have them defined, and you should start there and configure and make additional changes as needed. Always use the feature called retain parent category while creating custom categories, because it is important to make sure you don't have conflicts when you come to custom category versus already what Zscaler is categorized. And the next important aspect is keep the most specific policies at the top and the blanket policies which are applicable for all locations, all users in the bottom. That way you always, as I mentioned, the rule engine goes in sequence, and the first policy gets hit, appropriate action is taken. So it is important to make sure and have an understanding of what are the specific policies you need, and they should be always in the top. Always block categories in legal liability, anything to do with adult content, pornography, drugs, gambling, illegal and questionable matter, hate, extremism, any sort of weapons, bombs, all those kind of legal liability classes should be something always blocked just to avoid any sort of legal challenges for an enterprise. And also use caution for miscellaneous category along with newly registered and newly observed domains. And I also recommend, along with caution, you could also use isolate option or even leverage the smart isolate option, which we have introduced as a new configuration where AIML will automatically guide you towards which website needs to be isolated. That's something, especially on the miscellaneous, newly registered, and observed domains, you should leverage either a caution or preferably isolate if that is possible. And always look out for URL duplication within the categories and run a cleanup. This is a important hygiene or exercise always recommend customers to do, because oftentimes people put entries into these categories and they create new and more custom categories. It gets very difficult and challenging to identify these duplications, and it could end up in inconsistent policies as well in some scenarios. And we always recommend to block security category from a spyware, adware, and any anonymizer URL category, just because those are the things which our threat lab research team constantly identifies and adds URLs to that particular categories where we see any maliciousness or threats associated with that. So it's recommended to always block those categories. And default allow, don't configure explicit any block, because as I said, when you start with any block, it is always going to end up in a lot of incidents because people will complain, I don't have access to this website, that website, and all that stuff. So just to avoid all that operational challenges when you are starting, we always recommend a default allow with a more specific recommendations, what I talked earlier as specific policies on the top. That way you could use that as a catch-all to constantly analyze which needs to go into allow list and blacklist, and all of that could be done through an API. So these are some of the top recommendations we talk about for all of our customers. And one final recommendation I want to highlight before I end is for block policies that are very critical to enforce for certain groups, an additional block policy for unauthentication traffic is recommended. This is something we always recommend, especially when it comes to unauthenticated traffic.